Hello, my name is Bismuth Thief, and if you're watching this, you probably have seen at some point this. Yeah, this thing. It's not actually two banners. I've seen that a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people saying that they think it's two banners. It's not though. This is a glass gradient, and if you're watching this, it's probably because this piqued your interest and you want to know how to make it. Well, fortunately for you, that's what I'm going to show you today. Fun fact, every single glass gradient that you see here is the product of a tutorial that just did not record properly. As you can see, I have been at this a while, so hopefully this time I've got it all figured out, but we're going to find out. Okay, so before I actually show you how to make a glass gradient, I figure first I should probably show you how to make a fog effect, just in case you don't know that one. I know it's probably like one of the more commonly used building techniques as far as glasswork's concerned, but it can't hurt. Plus, there are a couple of different ways to make it, and they each have their own benefits, and they each have their own little limitations. So, I'm just going to go right on ahead and show you these now. So this is one that uses just layers of alternating glass and air, and if I go down to the bottom of this, you'll see it's just white stained glass, more white stained glass, all that. Now, one of the upsides to this is that it makes it so that way if you want to embed something in between the glass layers, that's already built in. You won't struggle with that. That being said, it also takes up way more space. Look at this. It's crazy. You've got so much space that this is taking up, and it's just what, 6 layers of glass? That's a lot. But it also makes the transition look a lot more gradual and, in my opinion, a bit more believable. So this is one that I see people use a lot. But then the other one that I see people use a lot is this. Now this, obviously, takes up much less space. You can see these are technically the same depth of stack, because I use the stack command for this. But they're the same depth, and this is just layering different colors of stained glass. So we've got white, we've got gray, white, gray, and it goes on. So upsides to this is takes up less space, so it's more efficient in that sense. And then it's also got it where if you want, you can mess around with color a bit more because you're adding in a secondary thing. Downsides, it will look a little bit less gradual, and then also it doesn't have any space built in, so that way you can just embed entities and lights and stuff into it like this does, which honestly is one of the things I like about this design, but for most cases, I just use this, and here's why. Because the way this is set up allows you to layer different colors. In this case, it's red, gray, brown. But you can switch around the colors a bit to make different shades and different just different overall colors just by messing around with this. So see, with this one, I just changed the bottom 2 blocks. I just switched their positions, and look. They're slightly different colors. Oh gee, I wonder how I might use that in a building scenario, right? So yeah, I think you can tell where this is going here. Just a quick note for troubleshooting this. If you ever see your glass, your fog effect, look like this, that means you probably just have 2 blocks of the same color right next to each other, so just break that one, or replace it with something else, and yeah, it'll look better. It'll look actually like fog. I've seen people do that a bit before, and it's okay, that's just the #1 mistake, from what I've seen. So yeah, that's just something I figured I should go ahead and point out now. So, I'm just going to really quick show you the base anatomy of a fog effect gradient, like a glass gradient, and it's this. So, I use 5 layers because basically every single layer in this will modify the front color in some way. So when you're building one of these, the only color you're really concerned with is the front one. So this. But all of these have an impact on what that front color is going to look like. So the way I number these is you've got this forefront color, which is what I call it. Friend used that term at one point, and I just kind of kept using it. So thank you, Vahan. But then this is the secondary color, and then these 3 are just more minor backing colors. So when you're using these, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of importance, with this being significantly more important to the overall color than the one behind it, and that's even more important than this. And then once you get back to here, it barely does anything to the color. Like, just like I showed you, it's just going to have like about this much of an impact. So technically speaking, you can make it a gradient that's much smoother than this even, but the issue is you'd have to use so many stacks of glass just to like have so many different layers of it. And I'm talking potentially like you could have thousands of layers of glass in this, but the more layers you have, even though the gradient's getting smoother, the harder it's going to be to see those changes. So yeah, that's why I tend to stick with 5 layers. That's just kind of how I do it. But something else you're probably going to notice is that I use glass panes here. Now there's a reason for this. So at the bottom you'll see it's all the same color right next to each other, which I told you is a bit of a no-no. However, you'll also notice that this does have an actual fog to it, and that's because the space in between the pane and the block of glass, it's not much, but it's just enough air to fit that into a singular, like, space, including glass and air, instead of having to put an entire air layer. So it really makes the gradient work so much better just by doing that. Of course, there's limitations. You can only do this when it's actually like a vertical gradient, but that's okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick some colors, and I'm going to start building this. And I think this time around, I'm going to do red to pink. So, in case you're wondering, I've been building so many of these at this point, like, just in an attempt to get like a solid recording of it. So I'm probably going to be way faster than I was before by the time I'm done recording this video, but that's okay. It's just I'm already 4 glass gradients in. And there's actually one on a different world too that just like, it was a world that I didn't have build tools on, so it took me way longer. It was kind of an ordeal. So you'll notice I'm using stack commands. This is partially just because it's easier to place down that way. But yeah, alright, so what you'll notice here is that I'm gradually introducing pink. And whenever I do, I switch the spot so that way anything that's behind it is going to be red. This is so that way it compensates for the fact that I'm gradually, wow, that's a great use of words. Okay. Anyways, I'm gradually introducing more and more pink into this, and as I'm moving it up the priority list, I need to make sure that I compensate for that in further back layers so that way it doesn't just like completely make just a really obvious transition. You'll also will probably notice that I just keep backing up over and over again. This is just so that way I can get a view of the overall gradient, which this birch tree is probably going to annoy me in a bit. So yeah, but let's see. Anyways, I'm just going to keep building this now, I guess. If you're watching this still, you'll probably notice that I just keep changing the orders a lot. And sometimes this can be a bit of guesswork, and it gets to be more guesswork once you start to do things like change the forefront color. That one's a bit iffy. For the most part, it follows a pretty similar pattern of just once you move something up in priority, you just change every block behind that to be the block that this was originally. But that's not always a guarantee. That white gradient got a little bit weird in that sense. So I just thought I'd let you know on that. But yeah. It's for the most part it follows a pretty normal pattern. Time to move this forward, and now I can move this back. And we are about to a very significant part, because this layer if you'll notice, if I can fly correctly, yeah, this layer, we have exhausted every single block that we could possibly change in the gradient without changing this one. We have to change the forefront. Now, this is where things have the most potential to get messy. So changing the forefront is the spot that has the most room for error, but this is sort of my go-to one for switching it. What I've noticed is that 9 times out of 10, having this as your transition layer when you're switching the forefront is a pretty solid bet. That being said, I have been wrong before. So, we're gonna see if it works this time. And it's looking like it has. So I will take that. Alright, so what I'm gonna do now is I am going to stack this and just keep building. I've got 2 layers to go. And now I can just stack it. Zoom out. And would you look at that gradient? Wow. So yeah, that's kind of the thought process behind how I make this. As you can see, it is definitely, like, it's definitely a process, and if you were to do this in survival, like, as you can see, it took me probably, what, like, 15 minutes or something just to construct this layer. Actually, no, it didn't take me 15 minutes, because I also did that. So this was probably, like, about 10 minutes or something to just do that layer. And 10 times, oh. It would have taken me, like, about an hour and a half to construct this whole thing if I were doing this in survival. Or not even in survival, if I was just doing it by hand. So I don't even want to imagine what it would be like in survival. I also want to show you a more practical version of how to do this. Which is to say, you can use glass to sort of augment pre-existing gradients. So, this goes from soul soil to netherrack. And really what it is I just took soul soil and netherrack, and I've got soul soil here, netherrack here, and I just put brown and red stained glass over it. And that changes up the color just enough to a point where it makes a nice smooth gradient. Now, that being said, you can make things much more cursed than that. So, allow me to demonstrate. If you've ever done anything at all that messes around with color theory, basically, oh, that's the wrong thing. But basically, color theory has this whole thing to it where it's like, you've got your complementary colors, right? And if you mix complementary colors together, you're going to get basically brown. So, if you can see where I'm going with this, red is a complement to green, and blue, or in this case cyan, is a complement to orange. And if you look back, yeah, this doesn't look horrible, does it? But yeah, you can basically use this to smooth out just about any gradient you have. And if you need any extra brown blocks for whatever reason, just because like there aren't enough in the game, which to be fair, sometimes you do want something that has a different texture, you can use this. If you're wondering what all you can do with the glass blending sort of technique, this entire back wall, like this entire background, is actually just stained glass. The blending here follows the same pattern as the glass gradient thing, all stained glass. This river, yeah, you guessed it, it's glass, except I put water behind it, so that way, if they haven't freaking disappeared into the abyss, which honestly I wouldn't be surprised by, but you can put fish in it, so that way it's extra realistic. I say as if any water that bright is ever going to be realistic, but it's okay because it looks pretty. Anyways, all stained glass. This is a little window design that I kind of started and then didn't really finish. Because, yeah, well, I finished the actual window, it's just this part. But, as you can see, surprisingly, stained glass techniques like layering and blending stained glass can be really helpful when you are making stained glass windows. Who would have thought, am I right? Alright everyone, so that's going to be the end of today's video. I'd expect a second part just because there's still a lot of stuff that I wanted to get to that I didn't really have the time for. It's already a pretty long video as it stands. But if you made it this far, please consider subscribing, and if you like this, just give it a thumbs up. If you want to see any more of like my content or builds that I make using this sort of a technique, I have an Instagram. I'll be sure to link it in the description. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.